What makes a great podcast episode? It is not just lights, camera, action. We're breaking it all down today, right here, right now, on Air Brands.
You are now tuned in to the On Air Brands podcast.
What's going on, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to the On Air Brand Show. Today, we are breaking down what every guest of a podcast, what every host of a podcast, what every aspirational host of a podcast needs to know. And that's what makes for a great episode. I am bringing in my great partners, Eric Cabral and Josh Kerry, to help me break it down.
I gotta say, Todd, you are a consummate professional for so many reasons. Let's be real, least of which is before we went on the air, we fell into a little lights, camera, action gimmick between the three of us. And I can't imagine that it was already baked into your opening. You took it on the fly.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and if that had been in a pre-show form, I would have probably overlooked it. But because we talked about it right before we came on the air, it was fresh in my mind and it just flew right out of my mouth, off the tongue very smoothly, just like the rolling R of Cabral.
Now, do you want to just give a quick insight into why you're doing it in such a deliberate way?
Yeah, so we just discovered after, Eric, I've known you for about a year now. Josh, you've known him 4 years. And for you've known him 4 years, not 4 years.
F-O-R.
Yeah. We both just discovered like a week ago that the actual pronunciation of Eric's name is not Cabral or Cabral, like our friend Josh McKellen likes to say, but it is Cabral. And so now I want to pay respect. I want to pay respect.
I am impressed. I am impressed, my friend. Thank you very much.
I'm not going to be able to pay anything.
Roll the R's.
My mouth I'll pay in other ways, but I can't pay that way.
All right, so guys, what we are talking about today is what everybody wants to know deep down, right? What makes for a great podcast episode? And in your show today of the Podmax podcast, so guys, if you're listening to us now, make sure you're subscribed over there because the guys dive deep into the news and topics and trends and all that stuff every week. And today, part of the topic was when you're a guest on a show, having these very long forms to fill out, and does that help make the show better or worse? So we wanted to, piggyback in today. And what makes for a great podcast episode? Mr. Cabral, let's hit you first. What do you think?
You're just taunting me now.
Well, thank you.
What do you think makes a great podcast episode?
Many things. I think one of the main things is obviously the host, right? If the host, to me, what pulls me into a great show is I have to be, number one, interested in the host. Like, what is he or she about? What makes them unique, special, interesting to me? Rogan comes to mind. Tim Ferriss comes to mind. What have they accomplished in life that inspires me to be like them? During the show, will they talk more about themselves because I want to learn how they potentially got to where they are, or will they be highlighting their guests? And then that brings up the second obvious reason is, do they bring on amazing guests? Do they bring on people that add value to my life and, can help me in something that I'm trying to figure out? So those are the simple answers.
Now, let me ask you this, because I find it very interesting. So you're very host based, right? So the people who are actually talking about it, does topic play a role at all for you? Or like, will you listen to a show you've never heard of the host, but the topic is very intriguing?
Yes, so that is secondary. So Gary V, for example, I'm in and out of his, Vaynerverse, because, you can only take so much of the same stuff. But lately I'm consuming a lot of Gary, and I'm going in for specific topics. So I do thumb through his feed and I say, oh, wow, he's talking about Clubhouse here. Or, wow, he's talking about this topic. So that is now playing into specific shows and personalities, but it doesn't play a role when I'm getting to know or like or jumping into a new show. Not necessarily the topics or the host.
Yeah, interesting. And so I'm similar with Gary, like you said, he puts out so much stuff, you only can take so much of it at once. But he's in my subscription feed, so I see the new stuff that comes out. So for me, previous to last week's episode, we talked about this and linked to it in last week about his episode talking about the modern business model and being a media company. And that's highly relevant to us and highly relevant to me. So as I saw his show in my feed, that topic was what looped me into that particular episode, but I don't listen to every episode of his, right? So Josh, Mr. Josh Carey, what do you think makes for a great podcast episode?
Well, I think the first question we need to ask is to help discover this is why do we like the shows that we like? What draws us in? And to Eric's point, I've been thinking about it, and I think it is first and foremost the host. That's the barrier to entry. Let's not forget. Do you like the person? Do you like them as host? Are you interested in what they have to say? And typically, I'm guessing that we like the shows we like, not as the first point of entrance, but we've already known them from other avenues, which I think is a whole other intriguing aspect of how you bring in people to it. So it's absolutely what makes a great show. It's the skill, the persona, the likability of the host behind the mic, doing their thing week after week or moment to moment as best as they can and appreciating it.
Yeah. And you know what you mentioned there about this, the show, the podcast is often not the first interaction of discoverability. And if you guys go back to season 2, episode 3 of the On Air Brand Show here, that's where we talk about that content strategy. And we talk about what role does the content of a podcast play? And it can play a certain role of awareness and attracting people, but really out of the gate where you can see value from having your own show is by using the podcast content to nurture and engage your existing audience from, if your existing audience is on social, email, wherever, but it's how do you communicate with them regularly in a valuable way, and having a frequent show is an easy way to do that. And then you can kind of crisscross and cross promote there. And I think that's a great point for people who might think, oh, my podcast isn't getting discovered by a lot of people. It's like podcasts usually don't get discovered. They're actually part of, you have to do some work on getting it discovered and then bring your audience into the show, right? Especially because the podcast platforms themselves are notorious for, searchability and discovering new stuff and that kind of thing. But before we get off too much on a tangent, you guys can hear more about that if you go back to episode 3. I want to break down something because I'm actually not the total opposite, but I do subscribe and listen to at least one show every week. I'm not going to name who it is. I don't like the host. But the show adds so much value from the guests that they bring on.
So it's not a deal breaker.
It's not a deal breaker for me because I know that this show itself will deliver high value for me through the guest, even though every time I listen, I'm like, man, this guy really just does not do it for me. Like if there's any
guy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So
isn't that like saying, I went out with this girl last week. I don't like her to save my life, but I love bowling.
Or her
I just love bowling. Right.
I love who she invites to the dinner.
I can't stand her. She makes me feel worthless and insecure. But roller skating is great, isn't it?
But so, for me, if he were a guest on someone else's show, I would intentionally skip that episode. And if he were doing solo shows, I would not listen. But the value of the topic and the guests is so tremendous that I'm able to do that, So that for me, I actually have the topic on top of the host. But, I think if we just break down like different sections of a show and talk about like, what can you do to make them great? Of course, just first of all, what are the topics, right? Like, how do you come up with the right topics that your audience is going to find valuable? And I think, and even before we break down each thing, let's talk about what is value, because that's what makes anything valuable, right? We need to be on the same page of value. So what makes a great podcast is basically saying what makes a podcast valuable. So according to Google's definition, value, and if you're watching the video show here, I'm leaning off to my second screen. The regard that something is held to deserve the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. So a great podcast episode has value and is useful in some way, shape, or form. And the way I like to break down like practical value, even from any marketing standpoint, whether it's a podcast episode or something else, is are we hitting one or all three of these things? Where are we giving education? Are we giving inspiration? Or are we giving entertainment? Right. And if you can hit all three of those from a business perspective, you're going to be hitting some home runs, right? When you can be entertaining, so people are paying attention and engaging with you, you're educating them, so you're empowering them. And that doesn't mean how-to information necessarily. You can educate in a lot of different ways. And you're motivating and inspiring them to want to take action, right? And I think when you hit all three of those, that's like the holy grail of value.
Can you repeat those again? Educate, inspire, and
I think that was out of the order. Educate, inspire, and entertain.
Yes.
Yeah. I think those three things. But it all starts it all starts with the topic, right? So I mean, whether you're paying attention to the host or the topic of the show, how do you come up with topics of value? And that comes down to knowing your audience and what is it that they're interested in. Right. And so if you go back to episode 2 of season 2 here, that's where we really help you dial in on who your audience should be and how do you pick a niche, or do you stay broad and get that stuff dialed in? Because once you have an addressable audience, that helps you figure out what topics should we cover here. Right. And so that's how, I mean, Gary lives in the comments of all of his stuff. So he's breathing all day what people are interested in. And then he uses that to fuel his conversations, which then get turned into episodes. And we'll actually also touch on that towards the end of this. Once we have all these pieces of a great episode, how can you pull from different parts of your videos and audio that you already exist and maybe seamlessly tie them together to make it a great episode, right? So, but knowing the topic that your audience is going to be interested in, when they see that, when they're scrolling through their podcast feed and they see that topic, is it going to hook their attention? Is that something that they want to know about or hear you exploring for 15 to 60 minutes, however long your episodes are, right? So I think topic is number one. And if you're the host of a show, you can't change who the host of the show is, right? You got to deliver this stuff in an entertaining way. And, Josh, as a professional performer and entertainer, what kind of tips do you have for people who might try to figure out, like, oh, one of the 3 holy grails is being entertaining, and the first thing you guys said was you have to be a great host. What are a couple easy tips for someone to be a good host that people want to listen to?
It would probably be prepare your co-host for such a question. Because I'm guessing you knew this question was coming.
You didn't read the form. You didn't read the form.
You didn't read the show notes prior to the pre-interview?
Oh my God, they are in the form, right?
It was a long-ass form.
No, but I'm sorry, this was in the document that I didn't read?
Who knows if it is? I don't know.
It is. Wow. So we'll cut that in post as well.
Yeah.
So that's 2 notes okay. So what are some tips, please? Repeat. Let's go.
Yeah, what are some tips that make a host entertaining? You're such a pro at it. See, this is your issue, Josh, where multiple times now you've said to Eric and I, oh, you need to hold off and you have to memorize something before you come off. What you don't realize is your unconscious competence of these things, that you are a world-class host of podcast shows and events. And you do it so seamlessly. And yet when I pose the question, you buy some time there. And I'll even throw that. That's a little tip. Josh just threw some humor out there, bought himself some time where you don't know right now, racking in the back of his brain is like, oh my God, what are some tips I can do? I know, I could see it in there. Todd, so now that we've bought you about 90 seconds here. So what did the back of your brain come up with here?
Could I catch name correctly?
Oh, and now he's going to.
Oh, I know.
That again?
I know. Can I cash those in to pronounce Eric's name correctly?
Buy more time and say my name.
Because you said you bought. Okay. What are some tips to be entertaining? Is that
be an entertaining host, right? Yeah. We're sitting down. We're chatting up here, Josh. We're having a cup of coffee. I'm asking you, what are some off the top of your head? What do you think I should do?
I think it comes down to practice. Originally, right? First and foremost, it's not something that can be done in your head or on paper, although some parts of this may start there. But this is absolutely one of the kinds of things that you just have to get on your feet and do. I mean, we're talking about how to be entertaining. That's a difficult class to teach, really, but there are some qualities and traits that people have that you can nurture that create that vibe for you. When you're in your living room or you're talking to friends, you know whether you're a likable person or an entertaining person. You want to figure out how to tell stories, right? How to communicate, which is a skill. Communication is a skill that you can absolutely learn. So read up on communication, how to communicate, right? Because once you have that foundation, you can then tweak that to make it entertaining, because it's difficult to be entertaining if you're not able to communicate well.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Look it up. Tell good stories. Work that muscle through yourself. Get comfortable with it.
And that's a skill that you can learn at PodMax. So if you guys want to get in on the training from Josh himself, that's podmax.co. April 16th will be the next one of those. You said a couple of great things there about stories. And in our last episode last week, which was episode 4, we talked about different types of stories that everyone should kind of have in their pocket when they're being a guest or being a host. So if you guys are looking for how do you put together a list of good stories for you to keep in your pocket, check out last week's episode. But I have on my list here of what makes a great podcast episode having stories. Right. So I think it's picking the right topic that people are interested in. It's being an engaging host. And I think it also, the idea of being entertaining becomes a mental block for people where they're thinking to themselves, I'm not entertaining. The same way when we talk about being a content creator, experts will say, well, I'm not a blogger, I'm not a vlogger, I'm not a host. But you will have no problem if I emailed you and said, Josh, what are a couple tips here for being a good host? You'd email me back and, or you text me back right away, right? Like these are things that we can naturally do, but there becomes a mental block. And so getting over that mental hurdle, and just when you're a passionate expert on a specific topic, and if you're a show host, you should be a passionate expert about it. These kind of conversations and engagement, your enthusiasm will shine through naturally, right? Like I think all three of us have that here, but if I were to be asked to come in and host a show on like collectible Hess trucks or something like totally random, like I would not have this level of enthusiasm for the same topic. So I think as long as you're passionate, you're an expert, you're knowledgeable on the subject, and you're enthusiastic about it, I think that's enough, at least as a base level, to be a good host that can be entertaining, where you're not just ho hum, right?
The one thing I want to say, Todd, when we're talking about entertaining, because some people may hear that word and immediately block it, or tune out or shut off. But I also want to point out that entertaining does not in every regard equal funny.
Oh, 100%. You're right.
Right. So it's not like, oh, no, I'm not funny. Right. Because in this regard, I think we're sort of implying or alluding that to be entertaining, you have to be over the top. You have to be funny, whatever it is. But there are so many TV personalities, anchors, right, that are entertaining, that aren't humorous or funny in the least, because that's not the mode of entertainment. So realize entertainment has a variety of colors.
Correct. And I think when you can be your authentic self and you're self-aware to that role, then once you own that 100%, it becomes much more natural, right? Again, that's something that Josh takes people through in the PodMax pre-training. So if you're interested in taking a deep dive in that podmax.co to sign up and learn more about that stuff. So we have our topics, we have our audience, we have our show host abilities. I already mentioned, I think, having stories that can be relatable. Stories are so powerful in so many different ways, but having a list of stories that are relevant to the topic of the episode makes sense. And so, I'll give a story to emphasize on that. Last week's episode, we were going through different ways and content strategies for podcasts. And I told the story of the TV mount had a million different pieces. It made things super complicated. And then it turned out it was actually very easy. It just looked very complicated. And then I segued that into, well, isn't that how business feels sometimes, where there's such a mess and so much noise? But if you want it to be simple, then blah, blah, blah. And then I introed the program as a story example. And so having stories you can use to illustrate your expertise and illustrate the customer journey that your audience is going on, and it makes it relevant to them, and it gets them engaged, right? It's a very I don't want to say easy, but it's a simple way for people to hook in and pay more attention from start to finish of what you're talking about, as opposed to just rattling off a bullet list that you have in a Google Doc on your second screen right now. But we have
What do you-
stories. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hey, not to throw you off here, Todd. What do you say to, I like to segment certain audiences into two parts, right? There's the left brain operators who are very
Yes.
analytical, data driven, and then you got the right brain people who are all the feels. They understand the story and appreciate stories. How do you speak to both audiences? Because the left brain analyticals are like, okay, Todd, get to the point. What are you trying to say? And where can I get some information that I can actually take action upon? But then you got the other people that are like, I'm loving every minute of this. And then appreciate it even more when you get to the punchline and say, hey, those 4 screws equal 4 steps.
Right.
And isn't that cool?
Yeah. I mean, I think this also goes to the kind of practice stuff that Josh was talking about and not necessarily rehearsing, but maybe having an outline and talking through it, but understanding that when you are talking to people, you're going to need, and this takes practice. I'm not saying you're not going to listen to us right now, hear these tips, and then you're going to be able to do it in an hour, right? Something you have to think about and work on. But the concept of open loops, right, is where you start a topic, open it up, and then you go into a different topic before you close the idea and keep it going. And I think to hit people from the emotional feels plus the analytical side is to say, okay, how can I start off a story with a little bit of data or something like that, that in one sentence ties numbers to a story and teases the end. So we open the loop. So the data people have to pay attention. And then you can go into a story that gets the emotional people hooked in and engaged and committed. And then you tie back in the data and stuff, right? So, if we were to talk about, did you know how much the podcast industry advertising budget is increasing in 2021? Because it really means a lot for how much your business can grow and the impact that you can have on your customers. So if you want to have a massive impact on your customers, this is something you want to pay attention to, because one of our clients who has a show, they started off and they didn't have any sponsors yet. They were just right out of the gate, but once they were able to get some traction and they got a sponsor in, they could actually reinvest that money into advertising and growing their audience. And now their podcast is reaching more people, impacting more people, and helping grow their business. And 41%, that's the number. The number of podcast advertising budgets increasing this year is 41%, right? So there's a lot more money on the table for businesses to take from, to earn from sponsors looking to get advertising slots in podcasts, right? So, for everyone not subscribed to the PodMax podcast yet, that was the topic today, right? The advertising, the podcast sponsorship advertising budgets are increasing 41% this year. So where we start that story off with, hey, here's some data and numbers we're going to be talking about. Then we tie in a story. Then we hit the emotional. They want to grow their business. They want to grow their audience. Then we told a story about a client who didn't have a sponsor, and then they had a sponsor and their business turned out great. And then we brought back in the numbers and the data. So I think when you can balance those things out, like I said, it takes practice of doing this over and over. And I got to be honest, I am shocked at how well I just did that. Even if that was
very impressive.
But it takes practice. But once you understand that and you can kind of balance and go back and forth between those two things, that's how you can hook people in, whether they're left or right brained. And it's important to do regardless, because people do like to, in general, people buy on emotion and justify with logic. So even if you think everyone's just emotional or just data-based, you still should have both of those things, because, I really want to buy a Tesla so that I can cruise down to the office by you guys, which is like an hour and a half away. And I won't tell the police officers my plans for how I'm going to get there in the Tesla, but that's something. And then I started telling my wife the other day, I was completely random numbers that really had nothing. I was comparing it to like Uber. Taking an Uber would cost $150 one way. And she's like, well, what difference does it make? You're not taking an Uber anyway. I'm like, just let me justify this purchase if I want to get one, would you? Right? Like, so even when we've already convinced ourselves to buy something emotionally, we're still looking for logic and numbers to just justify it a little bit. And so, I think it's always important to have a balance of those two things. And, I think we're talking about stories and numbers and data. Those are good things to have to make episodes great. But I think also having some practicality, especially if you have a business show, which is who we're talking to here, you want to have some kind of practicality to it, right? So there are action steps that people can take, because value is usefulness. And if you're in the business world speaking to potential clients and nurturing your audience, you want to give them practical steps they can take and say, wow, these guys over at On Air Brands are really helping me already grow my business, and we didn't even start working together yet, right? So I think when you're able to deliver some practical, useful value they can walk away with is very important to include in there. And I think so when you have that practicality, you tell stories that are engaging, that ties in the entertainment value, and hopefully we can do a little inspiring about how having a show can help you grow your business and motivate you to want to reach more people and impact more people. That becomes the inspirational part of it. So our goal every week here, even though we've never even spoken about it, I just know because the three of us are just really on that same frequency with a lot of things, is that we want to come to the table here and we want to be educational, inspirational, provide some entertainment value so that you do want to listen and come back every week, and help spread our message with the people that you think would also get value from it. And that's really what I think makes a great episode.
It's funny that you say all this, because if people haven't realized it by now, how many episodes in? Are we on 5?
This is 5, yep.
Yeah, we're in the 5th episode. And if you haven't realized by now, you are listening in real time what we're teaching, what we're sharing, how to do it. What this show is about is that On Air Brands is not a live podcast production, and that's all we do. We do many, many things. Podmax does many, many things. This is just the vehicle to introduce how much value, how much entertainment, how much inspiration you can get, everything Todd outlined right here, right now on Air Brands Live. So it's really cool as you begin to explain and to show the audience all the ingredients that are necessary to cook up a good show. Well, we do it every day, and we lead by example.
Yeah. And I think for anybody who's wondering, like, how do I get practice for these things? I want to reemphasize what Josh said before. If we're talking about the medium of video / audio, where you're actually speaking to the microphone and camera, is that if you are, no matter how prepared you are on paper, like meaning literally on paper where you wrote it out, or in a document where you wrote out what you want to say, if the words have never come out of your mouth before, the muscle memory is not there yet. And so just to even you're sitting by yourself in your office or whatever, say the words out loud so that your mouth has said them before, so that when you go to say them when you're recording or going live, it's already there. You've kind of given the pretext to your physical body to be able to do that. Yes. I think that makes a huge difference. And that's something I learned when I first started really studying sales more, was that I studied all these sales scripts. I was on sales coaching calls and all these kind of things. And then when I was on, like, one of my first sales calls after going through this training, I got to this point, like halfway through the call, I was like, oh, that was the first time I said those. And I didn't trip up, but I stumbled. I wasn't direct. And it was like, I've literally never said those words out loud before, even though I've read them and listened to them a million times. And so just saying the words out loud. And that is also the power of social media. And we've talked about this several times before, about the topic of riffing and stand-up comedians and social media, right? Where stand-up comedians put together a 60-minute Netflix special that looks flawless, and you laugh every 90 seconds, you belly laugh every 5 minutes, and at the end, you're curling over in your seat, you're applauding. Oh my God, these people are perfect. But what they don't see is that 7 days a week, probably 2 times a night, they're going to the club with 17 people, 22 people. They're practicing their jokes. They're getting up front. They're taking notes. What worked, what didn't. They're repeating things. They're getting their reps in. How do I pronounce this so it hits harder on the punchline? Do I set this up a little better? Right. And social media gives us that opportunity where every day, you can go on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can post a video, a 30, 60, 90-second video riffing on one of these topics that you want to be in your show. And you can riff on it a dozen different ways every day, because that post comes and goes very quickly on social. So you don't have to worry about it. And of course, you could always delete it afterwards if you didn't like it, or don't post it to begin with. But you get the reps in, the practice in, you get the riffing in. And by putting it on social, it gives you a little bit of a feedback loop about, okay, the people who did see it, what did they think? Did they like, comment, or share? And am I getting some traction here? Let me repurpose. I think that's another great reason to be a guest on podcasts, which if that's something you're looking to do, podmax.co, you get on 3 shows on April 16th. But what I've done in the past, which turned into actual products of mine, was I riffed on social media. I got a little traction with an idea. Then I went and I was a guest on a podcast. Then I came on as a guest presenter at 2 different events with a live audience. And I did the same topic over and over. And I worked out my routine by getting in the reps and getting that instant feedback loop from social and the live audiences on the presentations and the host where I was guesting. And then I was able to iron out, okay, this is what needs to be included here. These are the questions that people were asking. This is what made sense to them. And then that became a program that I sell now. And so when you want to get the reps in, use social media. It is free. It is in your hands right now, right? So get your reps in by just riffing on topics that you want to make episodes about, and you'll work and you'll find your voice. You'll work out exactly how you want to say things so they have more impact. I think, there's no excuse these days to not get those reps in to become a better communicator.
Two things about that. Acting 101 is the exact same way. In order to memorize a script, you don't do it in your head. You have to get on your feet and say it. You have to actually say the words, typically as close as you anticipate you saying them with the emotion and intention behind it. Get on your feet, walk around, and say the words over and over. Same exact technique. And then also talking about how you use the example of a comedian's 60-minute Netflix special. Have you ever seen the documentary from the early 2000s, Jerry Seinfeld's Comedian?
I saw it a long time ago, and I've actually been meaning to rewatch it.
Yeah. I just went back to it, funny enough, and I'm watching it, in like little spurts.
Yeah.
When he put his Seinfeld show to rest and came off of that show, he wasn't done with comedy. He put all those jokes aside and set out to create a brand new set of shows. So Comedian, the Netflix documentary special, follows Jerry Seinfeld as a comedian as he is in all these clubs working out new material. Some falls on its face, some is good. And you just see the evolution of how someone, Jerry Seinfeld, clearly the top of his game, but he still has to put in the reps. He still does it the same way.
Yeah. I wanted to share that too, just a personal thing that I experienced. Two amazing comedians, icons of our time. I got to watch them at play, figuring it out before their special, right?
Nice.
And literally with my feet on the stage in one of these experiences. But Chris Rock, not before Bring the Pain, I forget which special it was. I think it was The Messenger, where I got to see him working his performance out and saw the end result a year later. I'm like, oh, he got rid of this. He got rid of this. He got rid of this. I also saw Louis C.K. recently at Stand Up New York, and he literally had a notebook, a legal pad with all these scribbles on it. And he would say jokes. They wouldn't land, or they didn't land the way he expected. He would turn around and go, well, that sucked. Okay, hold on. Let me.
True.
And he would scribble things out and
Yeah.
go, maybe this word. Let me try it again. He would literally go to us and say, let me try it again and change the words around. So it's really cool what you said. I like the analogy, Todd, where we have the same or very similar tool set for us, and I'm hoping and imagining comedians use it too, social media, going live. You get that sort of adrenaline rush when you go live and you get to experience and get live feedback from your audience, what's working and what's not working. So good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And so last week we talked about the Recast Strategy, how you could actually curate your own podcast feed by just being a guest on other shows. And we also teased the idea, something that Gary Vaynerchuk does very frequently, of these mashup episodes where he has an episode and it's almost seamless if you're not fully paying attention, where where the topic of the episode is, let's call it, being a media company in 2021. And it's actually different clips from different podcast episodes, interviews he's done, social media videos he's done, keynote speeches he's done, and his team will pull them all together and make it into a structured episode because there's value in that, right? He's putting it out and they're mashing it up and they're making episodes out of that. And so that's something I think that our listeners can also do if you're just getting started and you're trying to figure out ways to do it, put together an actual podcast show. If you're already putting out content on social in videos, or if you're already doing Zoom meeting presentations that are recorded, or you're being a guest on other shows, you can take clips out of all of those different places and start making shows. So if we reiterate what we talked about today, what makes it for a great podcast episode, you want to have a good topic, you need to have a description that tells people why they should pay attention and what value they're going to get from listening to this episode. You want to have at least one story in the episode that emphasizes the point that you want to make, right? And give some examples. You want to be relatable. Also, something we didn't talk about was believability, right? So if you start telling stories or your headline is how to make $2 billion in overnight, no one if you're not believable enough with your stories, even if they're real, people will cast them aside and not pay attention because they don't believe it. So making sure there's believability in there. You want to have some action items or practical things, steps that people can take away, right? And so now when you start thinking of this, as you're putting out individual podcast episodes for yourself, as you're being a guest on other shows, as you're putting out your social media, video, and audio content, if you have this theme throughout them, if you tell different stories on different podcast episodes, you can then string them all together to have one episode that's just, our favorites, favorite stories about growing your podcast. And it could be that type of thing, right? And it's a mashup of those things. It could be the 10 best steps for growing your podcast. And it's actually 10 different social media clips that you did that had an individual step, but you mashed them up into one episode. So when you have these themes and you understand the structure of what makes for a great episode, you can look and you can pull together pieces and repurpose, because we love repurposing. You can repurpose all these different pieces of content that you're putting out into actual podcast episodes.
Love that. I would suggest, if you at some point, if you're implementing that now or later, taking the time to record a pre-roll, whether it's 30 seconds to 2 minutes, you teeing up what the audience is about to listen to and experience. So Josh and I often, when we realize this episode was on the stage at one of our events, well, let's explain to the listener what they're about to enter, so that people can, and this comes from Jason Pfeiffer, that when people tune into your show, they want to know generally what to expect. So if they're expecting Esquire magazine and all the content that they know and love there, but they're getting 17 magazine, well, that's going to, throw them off, and they're not probably going to want to come back. So let's just make sure that everybody frames it up so that people, can expect the magazine that they wanted to thumb through.
Absolutely. And fun fact, I was in 17 magazine when I was 16 years old, ahead of my time.
Were you really?
How about that? Yeah.
Dare we ask?
Yes.
I was, I know everyone thinks that I'm a natural at this whole thing, but I was on a TV show when I was in high school. And so as a cast member of the show, we ended up being interviewed in 17 magazine.
What show were you on? Now we got to keep going back.
It was on the Metro channel here it was in New York, cast across the tri-state area. And it was called Studio Y. It was an after school kids high school talk show. So there were two hosts who were, quote, adults, like they were probably 22. And every day there were like 4 to 6 high school kids that would come in, and it was a talk show, whatever topics of the day, topics of the week. We'd have segments. So I'd go out and do press junkets for an interview movie directors and actors and stuff for new movies that were coming out. It was very fun. It was a great experience. And I often, honestly, it's like, that feels like 10 lifetimes ago. So I forget about that. And I don't even like to talk about it too much, because I don't want people to think, oh, I can't host a podcast. I wasn't on a TV show when I was in high school. It's like, dude, it was it was nothing. It was nothing.
Was that the one with Alyssa Milano on the cover?
No, Carson Daly actually was on the cover there.
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
You gave me flashbacks, and I'll share this on another show, since we are winding down here on the On Air Brands Live podcast. I was on MTV during college. Yeah, on one of those.
Carson Daly. So how did that go down?
Yeah, they showed up to my school at the time, School of Visual Arts, and there was a camera crew. And I was like, what's going on? There's cameras and there's lights. And they came over to me and my crew hanging out in the cafeteria, and I jumped on the table and did my best Scarface impression.
Nice.
And I never saw it. I got phone calls from friends and family saying, you were just on TV. What was that about? And I'm like, I was. I had no idea. I tried to track down the video. This is obviously before the internet. And I just can't. I even reached out to the producer of the show, because she was an SVA alum. And so I had her, I called her mother, actually. And I said, hey, she was at my school, our school, and where is it? And, she'll send you a VHS tape of it. Never
got it.
Never,
Yeah. I mean, I'll say, we've talked about, and by the way, guys, we're off the rails here. We're off the rails, and I'm okay with it.
Officially.
That's how we roll. We're here to have fun. This is the entertaining part of the episode. But so to to go back to what Josh was saying before, and what you guys talked about, is to be courageous and step into doing things and saying yes and practicing. And so the way that I actually got on this show in high school was because in between classes, I went and there was, in between whatever period, that was where I would see my girlfriend at the time. And I went, and she wasn't at her locker. And so her friend that was there, I said, "Oh, where's she?" She said, "Oh, she's doing that like audition thing for the TV show." I said, "What audition thing for the TV show?" She says, "Oh yeah, out in the, in the whatever, in the back parking lot, they have this tour bus and they're interviewing people to be on a TV show." I said, "Wait, but so do you get out of class for that?" And she said, "Yeah, you get out of class for that." I said, "Boom, I'm there." Right. So purely the only reason I went was just because I got to skip class.
Nice.
And I go, and it was on like one of the tour buses, and they would take in like a handful of kids at once, and they throw out one topic. And the topic, and this is the power and importance of having a unique voice and owning your own perspective. Mm-hmm. So they said, the school year is from September to June, and there's talks of it being changed to be the full 12 months of the year where you go to school all 12 months. I don't know if this was real at the time or if it was, they just threw it out there, but that was that they said. So what's your take on this? And so they go and they start on the opposite side, and each person said, "Oh, well, that would be great, because if we had 3 more months to learn, then, we'd be able to learn." So all this BS, right? Like, and so then I'm like, I just got fed up after like the third person, and I interjected myself, and I took the microphone. I said, "Look, if they're talking about changing school to full year because they're saying that September and June are a wash, no one's paying attention because they're starting and ending," I said, "Here's the solution. We stop coming to school in September and June, and we only go from October to May. And that's what we should be doing for school." And then, so that was it, right? And I had no intentions of being on the show whatsoever. I'm just skipping class. I'm skipping class, by the way, right? Yeah. And so then, as we're all walking, as it ends, and we're all walking out, the producer woman touches my arm and says, "I think you're going to get a call back."
That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. And so it was super cool. And look, I wasn't the only one. They picked like a handful of kids, and there was a big rotation, but it was a fun experience. And it's something that feels like 10 lifetimes ago. So if you weren't on a show in high school, don't feel like you can't have a podcast now, because Mr. Cabral here was not on a show in high school, although he did show the boldness and courageousness of doing such an act.
And that is the point, isn't it? The moral and the point of these stories that the two of them connect is we took a chance, right? Did something out of the box. It wasn't safe, and it made it. It made the cut. And that is sort of what happens when Josh and I run our events. We notice the people in the room that stand out for whatever reason. They put themselves out there, and we embrace it, and they come into the fold, and we all do wonderful work together.
Yep, for sure. And so let's just to recap what makes for a great podcast episode, guys. We were all over the place today, but hopefully it was entertaining. Hopefully it was practical. Hopefully it was educational. Hopefully it was motivating and inspiring. And hopefully it was entertaining. Those are the factors that make for a great podcast episode, right? And so you want to have a great topic and make sure that's in your title. You want to tell some fun stories that are also relatable and believable and emphasize and illustrate the point of why you're having the show and the value that you want to bring to your audience. You want to have some practicality and give some action items for people paying attention so that they can end listening to the episode and take action and be inspired to move forward. And really, that's how you have great podcast episodes that impact your audience on a high level. And with that, hopefully we'll come back with more great value for you next week, Wednesday at noon, if you're watching live, or make sure you're subscribed to the show On Air Brands Season 2. Thank you guys for listening today, and we will catch you on the next episode.
You're now tuned in to the On Air